My name is Megan Carter. I'm 38 years old. And this story begins on what was supposed to be one of the most important nights of my life. My father, Richard's 65th birthday party. A celebration I meticulously planned, organized, and financed, hoping it would finally give me the place I had always longed for in my family. But instead, the night delivered a cruel message. I had no seat at my father's table. Not literally, but in every sense that mattered. The chair I reserved in my name was given away to my brother, Ryan's new girlfriend, Grace, who had been with him just weeks. The realization hit me like a cold wave, sweeping away every shred of hope I had harbored. I remember standing there on the rooftop terrace of the Midtown penthouse, the New York skyline twinkling behind the tables set for dinner. The guests were laughing, clinking glasses, sharing stories. My mother Eleanor sparkled under the soft lighting, her perfectly rehearsed smile a mask for the cold calculation beneath. My father sat at the head of the table, regal and commanding, the kind of man whose power was both magnetic and terrifying. Ryan was smug, arm wrapped possessively around Grace, the golden child basking in the glow of their combined status. But me, I was an outsider, an invisible shadow in the very family I had spent years trying to impress. Counting the empty seats twice to make sure I wasn't imagining things, I felt a deep knot form in my stomach. There was no place for me. No one had told me beforehand. When I finally confronted my mother, her smile didn't falter. We had to make room for Grace. "You understand, Megan," she said, her voice sharp with unspoken finality. Polite laughter rippled around the table, an audience complicit in my erasure. I searched my father's eyes, desperate for even the faintest sign of support or regret. There was none. Just a dismissive shrug, as if to say, "This is your place." The air around me thickened with the bitter realization that this wasn't a mistake. It was a deliberate message. I whispered the words that had been burning inside me for years. "Seems I'm not family." They fell like a verdict in the night, cutting through the warmth of the celebration and plunging me into a silence so deep it was deafening. The story of that night is more than just a stolen chair. It is the culmination of decades spent fighting for recognition in a family that saw me as little more than a background figure. But to understand how I ended up there, standing alone while the rest of my family celebrated, I have to go back several months to the phone call that started it all. My mother's voice on the other end was deceptively sweet. "Megan, darling, your father's 65th is coming up. We want it to be special, something memorable. Something that will finally show the world you're more than just his daughter." At that moment, I was sitting in my small, bustling office of Elite Events, a boutique event planning company I had fought tooth and nail to build from scratch. My walls were lined with awards, articles, and photos of successful projects. To my parents, it was just a hobby, something to keep me busy while Ryan got all the attention. But to me, it was my lifeline, my proof that I could stand on my own. When Mom suggested a grand birthday party in New York City, a lavish event that would finally bring me into the family spotlight, I was torn. My business partner Sarah was immediately skeptical. "Megan, this sounds like a trap," she warned, her eyes weary from having seen my family's games before. But I was desperate for approval, for a seat at the table, for validation. So I agreed. The months leading up to the party were a whirlwind of calls, meetings, and logistics. I booked the penthouse, hired the best caterers, arranged a live jazz band, and even secured an exclusive tasting menu designed by a Michelin-starred chef. All of it came with a price tag that far exceeded my budget. But I convinced myself it was an investment in my future, the key to finally being seen and respected by the people I loved. Then the red flags began. First came the vague excuses from my father about delayed payments. Cash flow issues, he said. It's temporary. When the deposits for the venue, the caterers, and the entertainment started rolling off my company's credit cards, I swallowed my frustration. I told myself it was worth it. I reminded Sarah again and again that this was a chance for us to land the Davidson account, a business deal that could catapult elite events to the next level. But then the evidence piled up. A letter from a debt collector arrived unexpectedly, threatening legal action over a business loan default. My stomach twisted. Our family's financial empire was far from the untouchable fortress I'd imagined. Worse still, I caught glimpses of my mother and Grace returning from luxury shopping trips, their bags charged to the events account. The money I had put in was funding their lifestyles, and they didn't even try to hide it. The final blow came when, on a whim, I stopped by a cafe near the penthouse and saw my father and Ryan deep in conversation with Marcus Stone Davidson's fiercest rival. The betrayal was unmistakable. They were using the prestige of my event, the very success I had fought for, to court the enemy. In that moment, the hopeful daughter who thought this party might change everything died. What I felt wasn't just anger, it was a cold, calculated resolve. I was done being their pawn. After that shocking encounter on the bustling streets of Manhattan, I returned to my penthouse suite, my heart pounding with a strange mixture of anger and clarity. The city lights outside blurred through the rain-streaked windows as I sat down at my laptop and opened the file Sarah and I had carefully crafted months before contingency protocol, Carter. It was a meticulous legal plan we had worked on with Jessica Lee, a sharp corporate lawyer who understood how to shield my company from financial disaster. I had kept it as a last resort, a safety net in case my family's promises ever turned into the mess I now faced. I dialed Jessica's number, my fingers trembling slightly as I waited for her calm voice to pick up. "Megan," she said. "What's going on?" I didn't mince words. I explained everything: the mounting unpaid bills, the blatant misuse of funds, the betrayal I had just witnessed. Jessica listened patiently and then laid out the next steps with surgical precision. "You can revoke any further financial guarantees," she said. "You can protect elite events from becoming a scapegoat. But you have to be prepared for fallout personally and professionally." I felt the weight of that warning, but beneath it was a cold steel resolve. This wasn't just about business anymore. This was personal. They had used me, taken my hard work and turned it into a playground for their selfish games. I would not let it continue. The days that followed were a careful dance of strategy and patience. I didn't confront them immediately. I watched, listened, gathered every shred of evidence. My father and Ryan played their parts with practiced ease, smiling, charming the elite guests, spinning stories of family unity while I was the one quietly footing the bills and absorbing the humiliation. At every meeting, I felt the sting of invisibility. My ideas dismissed, my role minimized. Ryan, who had never held a real job, was the golden boy, the favored son. Grace was the new trophy, shiny and unquestioned. Meanwhile, I was the one who planned the event, coordinated the vendors, and managed the chaos that was carefully hidden from the public eye. One evening, during a dinner rehearsal for the party, I overheard a conversation that cracked open a hidden truth. My Aunt Carol, a cunning woman with a reputation for stirring trouble, was whispering to my mother about Ryan's recent failed startup. If he crashes again, we might have to lean on Megan more, she said with a sly smile. Her business can cover the gaps she always does. It hit me like a slap. They weren't just ignoring me. They were exploiting me. I wasn't family. I was their emergency fund, their fallback plan, their invisible bank account disguised as a daughter. The realization was suffocating, but it fueled a fire deep within. I began to draft my own plans, not for a party, but for retribution. I needed to protect myself, my business, and my dignity. The grand celebration would become my battleground. As the birthday dinner approached, tensions mounted beneath the surface. I arranged every detail with surgical precision, determined to make the night unforgettable, but not for the reasons they expected. On the day of the party, I arrived early, dressed impeccably in a tailored navy suit that was both armor and declaration. I greeted Marco, the restaurant's maître d', with a nod. He had become an unlikely ally over the past weeks, discreetly sharing insights and offering quiet support. Everything is set, he assured me, but I could see the flicker of worry behind his practiced smile. The family arrived, each playing their roles perfectly. My father, with his booming laughter, my mother's sparkling conversation, Ryan's easy charm, and Grace's polished smiles. They took their seats, laughter filling the room. And then I walked in. The sight of me seemed to unsettle them. Ryan's smirk faltered. My mother's smile tightened. Their carefully constructed facade cracked just enough to reveal their true feelings: irritation, surprise, and maybe a hint of fear. When I approached the table, Ryan couldn't resist his usual jab. Look who finally decided to show up, he sneered. The party planner checks on her work. My mother's eyes flashed with a cold edge. We made room for Grace. Megan, you should understand. But this time, I was different. I didn't shrink or plead. I looked each of them in the eyes, steady and unyielding. You made your choice, I said quietly, and now you'll live with the consequences. The room fell into an uneasy silence. My father shifted uncomfortably in his seat but said nothing. The guests sensed the tension, their chatter dying down. As the meal progressed, I watched them carefully. The expensive wine, the delicate dishes, the carefully orchestrated toasts, it was all a stage. A play they thought they controlled. But I held the script now. Then came the moment I had been waiting for. Marco discreetly approached the table with the bill. The credit cards were presented and declined, first my father's, then my mother's. Prudia. A palpable panic spread across their faces. The laughter turned into stifled whispers. I stepped forward calmly. As per the contract, I said, my voice carrying across the room. All expenses beyond the initial deposit are no longer covered by elite events. The balance is your responsibility. My father's face contorted with rage and disbelief. This is outrageous, he spat. You planned this. You're responsible. No, I said, voice steady. I was the planner. You were the host. At that moment, Robert Davidson, the very client I had been trying to impress, rose from his table and approached us. His expression was one of calm authority as he surveyed the scene. I trust this is being handled professionally, he said, looking directly at my father. The color drained from my father's face as Davidson's gaze shifted to me with respect and approval. The power dynamics in the room shifted irreversibly. The man whose approval my family had desperately sought now saw through their facade and saw me for who I truly was. The room was silent. Every eye fixed on my family's unraveling dignity. The laughter was gone, replaced by a suffocating tension. They were exposed, vulnerable, defeated, and I was free. The weight of the moment settled over the room like a thick fog, dense and inescapable. My father's face was drained of color. The once proud patriarch now reduced to a man teetering on the edge of ruin. The other guests shuffled uncomfortably in their seats, their polite smiles replaced by guarded glances and whispers behind half-raised glasses. The gleam in Robert Davidson's eyes told me everything I had earned his respect. And my family's carefully curated image had just shattered in front of the very people whose opinion they had coveted for years. I stood there, calm, composed, a stark contrast to the storm raging behind me. For decades, I had been the invisible daughter, the silent powerhouse, the one who kept the wheels turning while they basked in the spotlight. Tonight, the spotlight was mine, and I was done hiding. As the murmurs grew louder, my mother's eyes locked with mine across the table. The sparkle of socialite grace had completely vanished, replaced by something raw and desperate. "Megan," she hissed, her voice trembling with fury and fear. "This isn't over. You think this will break us? We are family. You owe us." I met her gaze steadily, feeling a surge of something fierce and unyielding rise inside me. "Family doesn't mean blind loyalty," I said quietly but with an unmistakable edge. "It means respect, accountability. And I have been nothing but the bank, the planner, the invisible force. Tonight, that changes." My words landed like thunder, silencing even the whispers. My brother Ryan, who had been unusually quiet, suddenly slammed his fist on the table, sending a crystal glass rattling. "You don't get to talk to us like that," he growled. "We've given you everything." The bitter irony made my lips curl in a slight, bitter smile. "Even me I écoute." The memory of years of neglect flashing through my mind. "You've taken from me. Used me to prop up your failures and your illusions. I gave you everything. But you never saw me." Their stunned silence was broken by the clatter of the bill being placed firmly on the table by Marco. The maitre d' returned, his face unreadable, but his posture unwavering. "Mr. and Mrs. Carter, the outstanding balance must be settled before departure," he announced with quiet authority. Panic flickered in my mother's eyes as she fumbled for her purse, only to find the credit cards declined once again. My father muttered curses under his breath, his confidence crumbling. I watched the facade fall piece by piece, the luxury, the charm, the illusion of control all evaporating in the cold light of truth. Amid the chaos, I felt a surprising calm wash over me. This was my moment of victory, not just over unpaid bills or broken promises, but over the years of invisibility, disrespect, and betrayal. I was reclaiming my power. After the guests had left and the last echoes of the evening faded, I retreated to my hotel room. The adrenaline was still coursing through my veins, but beneath it was a profound exhaustion. I sank into the plush armchair, the city lights of New York twinkling through the window like distant stars. The battle was far from over, but tonight had been a turning point. The next morning, the phone calls began. First, from my lawyer Jessica, confirming that the contingency plan was in motion. legally binding the Carter family to cover the debts accrued beyond our initial agreement. Then from Sarah, my business partner and closest confidant, who had stayed in the background but was ready to fight alongside me. But the most unexpected call came from my uncle, Thomas, a man estranged from the family for years. He had kept his distance, disillusioned by my father's reckless choices. "Megan," he said, with a voice heavy with regret, "I've heard what happened. You don't deserve this. There are things you don't know, secrets that might change everything." Curiosity and caution warred inside me. What skeletons did he mean? And could he be trusted after all this time? That afternoon, I met Thomas at a quiet cafe in Brooklyn. The man before me was softer than I remembered, his eyes carrying the weight of years lost to silence. He shared stories of my father's darker past, the risky financial gambles, the betrayals of business partners, even a brush with legal trouble that had been quietly swept under the rug. But what shook me most was the revelation about Ryan. Thomas explained how my father had protected him, not out of love, but out of debt I never knew existed. A past mistake that bound them together in a toxic pact of secrecy and favoritism. The pieces clicked into place. Ryan's golden child status wasn't about affection, it was about control. And I had been the collateral damage all along. I left the cafe with a newfound clarity. The family I thought I knew was a fragile illusion, held together by lies and fear. But I was no longer willing to be part of the deception. Back at the office, I pored over contracts, invoices, and emails, any evidence that could further protect my business and expose their recklessness. The legal shield was strong, but I knew that true victory required more than just paperwork. It required a complete dismantling of the toxic dynamics that had defined my life. That night, as I sat alone in my apartment, the city's hum, a distant lullaby, I began to draft a letter, a declaration of independence. It was addressed not just to my family but to the version of myself that had spent years seeking their approval. I wrote about betrayal and resilience, about breaking free from chains of obligation and reclaiming dignity. And as I typed the final words, a calm determination settled over me. This was more than revenge. It was liberation. Yet, beneath that calm was a simmering anticipation. The next moves would be calculated, precise. The family dinner was only the opening act. The real reckoning was yet to come. The days that followed were a whirlwind of meetings, phone calls, and whispered conversations. I was no longer just the daughter or the event planner, I had become a strategist. A force mobilizing every resource at my disposal. Jessica Milavier was relentless, drafting cease and desist orders and preparing for potential lawsuits. Sarah rallied the elite affairs team, ensuring every contract was airtight, every contingency covered. But beneath the surface of this professional storm, my mind churned with something more personal, the blueprint for dismantling the empire my family had built on my back. I started with my brother, Ryan. He had always been the golden child, the favored one. But now he was just a vulnerable target. I arranged a private meeting under the guise of reconciliation. The cafe was neutral, the light dimmed just right to hide my intentions. When he arrived, his confident smile faltered slightly. He wasn't used to me taking the lead. "Ryan," I began calmly, "we need to talk. About what happened in Rome. About everything." He scoffed. "What's there to talk about? You threw a tantrum and made us look bad." I let his words hang in the air before replying. "It wasn't a tantrum. It was a wake-up call. You're not the golden child because of merit, you're protected because of debts. Secrets Dad paid with your silence. His expression shifted. For the first time, I saw the flicker of fear beneath his bravado. You don't know what you're talking about, he said, voice lower, less certain. I know more than you think, I said, leaning forward. And I'm done covering for your failures. If you want to keep this family name from sinking, you'll cooperate. Because I'm not stopping. Ryan's silence was all the answer I needed. Leaving the cafe, I felt the weight of a new war beginning. It wasn't just about unpaid bills or broken promises. It was about unraveling decades of lies and redefining what family meant for me. I couldn't help but wonder how far they would go to protect their secrets and whether I was ready for the fallout. Back at the office, I buried myself in research. Every email, every invoice, every whispered rumor about my family's dealings became ammunition. I discovered shell companies, hidden accounts, and questionable loans, all linked back to my father's name. The picture that emerged was one of reckless ambition and desperation, a man clinging to power while dragging everyone around him into the abyss. One evening, as I sifted through yet another stack of documents, my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. You're closer than you think. Be careful. The message was cryptic but chilling. Someone was watching someone who didn't want my investigation to continue. I showed the text to Sarah, who frowned. This just got personal. The next few days were tense. Strange calls with no one on the other end. Unmarked cars parked near my apartment. An anonymous package left at my doorstep, containing nothing but a single black chess piece, a king. Toppled over. I didn't flinch. This was the world I had stepped into, and I was determined not to back down. Meanwhile, the fallout at home was palpable. My parents were forced to confront their mounting debts and the legal repercussions of their reckless spending. The foreclosure notices on the Chestnut Hill property were just the beginning. Invitations to exclusive clubs were rescinded. Old friends distanced themselves quietly. The glamorous facade they had maintained was crumbling. Piece by piece. One afternoon, I received a call from Aunt Carol, my mother's sister, who had always played the role of the family's secret keeper and meddler. Her voice was wary, almost pleading. Megan, you need to be careful. Your father and Ryan, they're not going to take this lying down. They're scrambling. I can help you, but you have to trust me. He hesitated. Memories of her subtle manipulations surfacing. But desperation can change loyalties. And I sensed an opportunity. Tell me everything, I said. What she revealed shocked me. Behind the scenes, my father had been negotiating with a rival investor, Marcus Thorne, a ruthless man with a reputation for corporate takeovers and no mercy. Thorne had offered financial rescue, but at a price control over the family's business interests and assets. The stakes had just escalated beyond personal grudges to a full-scale power struggle. Thorne's involvement meant my family was not only losing ground, they were selling off pieces of their legacy to stay afloat. Armed with this knowledge, I knew my next move had to be strategic and unrelenting. I began reaching out to key contacts, building alliances with former associates of my father's and even Thorne's network. If I was to reclaim my life and protect my company, I needed to outmaneuver both the family's crumbling empire and the predators circling it. But amid this calculated chess game, there were moments that cut deeper than any corporate battle. Late one night, I sat alone in my apartment, scrolling through old family photos, vacations, birthdays, moments I had hoped meant something more. The ache of loss was raw and unyielding. I realized that the family I was fighting wasn't just flawed, they were gone. What remained was a hollow shell. And I had to build my own future from the ruins. This internal conflict fueled my determination. Revenge wasn't just about punishment, it was about reclaiming identity, self-worth, and the chance to be seen as more than a pawn in their selfish games. As the countdown to the next family gathering, a tense Thanksgiving dinner approached, I prepared not just my arguments and legal weapons, but a carefully crafted plan to expose every betrayal and demand the respect I deserved. I wasn't going to be invisible any longer. The stage was set, the players positioned, and the game was about to begin. Thanksgiving arrived like a storm I had been bracing for but could never truly prepare myself to face. The Morgan family estate, once a symbol of warmth and unity, was now heavy with unspoken accusations and simmering resentments. I stepped inside feeling the weight of every eye on me. A mixture of disdain, surprise, and barely concealed hostility thickened the air. My father sat at the head of the long oak table, his posture rigid, but his eyes scanning with something like unease. Ryan, ever the golden child, smiled too brightly, trying to mask his uncertainty. The guests exchanged polite greetings. But beneath the veneer of civility, tension clung to the room like a thick fog. I could feel it prickling at the edges of my skin, the silent contest of wills that would soon erupt. I took my seat deliberately, the chair's scrape against the hardwood floor echoing in the silent room. This was my moment. Dinner began with the usual pleasantries, but my words cut through the polite chatter like a sharpened blade. Before we begin, there's something I need to say. All eyes turned to me. Some curious, some wary. This family has been built on secrets and sacrifices, mostly sacrifices I've made alone. But the time for silence is over. My voice didn't waver. But inside, a storm raged, memories of betrayal, of being sidelined, ignored, and used. The faces around me tightened, defensive and angry. My mother's smile was thin, brittle, and cold as ice. "Megan, this isn't the place," she hissed softly. But I was already rolling forward. "I've uncovered everything, the debts, the lies, the deals made behind my back. And I'm here to make sure we finally face the truth." The room fell into a heavy, suffocating silence. My father's eyes flashed with anger. But I wasn't finished. "I'm not here to destroy this family, but I won't let it destroy me either." A low murmur rose from Ryan. "You think you're some kind of hero, you're just tearing us apart." I met his gaze, steady and unflinching. "No, Ryan, I'm saving myself. And if that means exposing everything, so be it." The rest of the night spiraled into a battleground of accusations and revelations. Aunt Carol, who had always lurked in the shadows, I finally spoke, her voice sharp and cutting, siding with me in a stunning twist. She revealed details of my father's desperate negotiations with Marcus Thorne, confirming the betrayal that threatened to consume us all. The dinner ended not with hugs or reconciliation, but with slammed doors and a family fractured beyond repair. As I left the estate, the cold night air filled my lungs, sharp and invigorating. I knew this was only the beginning. Back at my apartment, the messages and calls came flooding in, some from allies, others veiled threats. Marcus Thorne's name hovered over every conversation, a specter of menace. But I was prepared. The contingency plan Jessica and I had crafted was now in full motion. Legal teams, financial audits, and strategic partnerships were aligning like pieces on a chessboard. Then came the first strike. News broke of an anonymous leak, a scandalous revelation about my father's involvement in fraudulent deals, complete with documents and emails that implicated him directly. The media frenzy was relentless. Headlines screamed betrayal and greed. And the Morgan name was dragged through the mud. The family's response was predictable denials, accusations, and desperate attempts to silence the storm. But I stayed silent, letting the truth speak for itself. Each day brought new disclosures, each more damning than the last. I watched as their empire crumbled, piece by piece, feeling a mixture of satisfaction and sorrow. This was justice, but it came at a cost. Amid the chaos, a surprising ally emerged: my uncle, Robert. Estranged for years, but now reaching out with information and support. His insights into the family's financial labyrinth were invaluable. He warned me of deeper corruption and advised caution. Trust was a scarce commodity, but his help was genuine. The final confrontation came at a court hearing, a dramatic showdown where truth and lies clashed under the unforgiving glare of public scrutiny. My father's defense crumbled as evidence piled high, while I stood firm, a symbol of resilience and retribution. The judge's ruling was swift and decisive. The Morgans were liable for massive debts, and assets would be liquidated to repay creditors. The courtroom emptied with whispers and stares. Outside, the press swarmed. But I held my head high. This was my victory, hard-earned and unassailable. In the weeks that followed, I rebuilt elite affairs, shedding the toxic ties that had held me back. My relationship with Sarah deepened, built on trust and shared dreams. Isabella, my partner, was a constant source of strength and love, reminding me that family could be chosen, not just born. One quiet evening, as we walked along the river, I reflected on the journey, the pain, the betrayal, and the triumph. Revenge had not been about destruction, but about reclaiming power and peace. It was about standing tall when everything else fell away. The past was a shadow, but the future was mine to shape. And for the first time, I felt truly free. Story 2. My name is Emily. I'm 29 years old. And for most of my life, I was the invisible one, the quiet kid, the backup plan no one really noticed until they needed something. But what I didn't realize then was how deeply that invisibility would shape my life and how it would fuel a fire inside me that no one saw coming. This is the story of how my family abandoned me the day I turned 18, leaving me stranded with nothing but a $20 bill and a cruel lesson in responsibility. What they didn't know was that their betrayal was just the beginning of my rise, my revenge, and my reclaiming of power. 14 years ago, I stood outside a rundown motel in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, my backpack slung over one shoulder and a single $20 bill in my pocket. It was supposed to be the start of a week-long family vacation. But instead, it was the moment I realized I was alone. The night before, my uncle, who was supposed to be watching out for me, decided it would be funny to leave me behind, saying it was a lesson I needed to learn about responsibility. No goodbye. No explanation. Just gone. When I found the motel bill slipped under my door with the $20 folded neatly inside, something inside me shattered but also hardened. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I simply packed my few belongings and walked out the door. Stepping into a new life, I was forced to build on my own terms. I wasn't just abandoned, I was erased, cast out from the family I thought I belonged to. But I knew one thing for sure: if they wanted me to learn responsibility, I would learn it, but on my own terms, not theirs. The next few weeks were a blur of bus rides, cheap motels, and odd jobs. I used every bit of my savings, every freelance gig I could find online, and every ounce of grit to claw my way out of that hole. There were moments I felt desperate, moments I wanted to give up. But I couldn't because giving up meant accepting their narrative that I was disposable. I was determined to prove that their cruelty wouldn't define me. Years passed, and I moved cities, changed numbers, deleted social media. I became a ghost to them. No birthdays, no holidays, no awkward calls, just silence. And in that silence, I found strength. I built a tech consulting business from nothing, grinding through contracts, late nights, and endless rejections. I never told them about my successes, never bragged or sought their approval. I just worked, because I knew the only way forward was on my own. Then one day, out of the blue, they showed up. My uncle, aunt, and cousin walking into the lobby of my office building, carrying resumes and empty smiles, completely unaware that the shy kid they left behind was now the CEO sitting quietly at the front desk. I didn't stand up to greet them. I didn't fake a smile. I simply said, "Security will show you out." That moment was my quiet declaration I had moved on. And I wasn't theirs anymore. They had treated me like a joke. But now it was time they faced the consequences of their choices. What followed was a slow unraveling of lies, accusations, and desperate attempts to reconnect only to be met with firm boundaries and cold reality. Yet, beneath it all, the wounds remained. The pain of being cast aside by those who were supposed to protect me still echoed, fueling a complex mix of anger, sadness, and resolve. I wasn't just fighting to be seen, I was fighting to take back my story, my dignity, and my life. This is the story of betrayal, survival, and the power of self-worth. It's a story about how family can hurt the deepest, but also how resilience can shine the brightest when all seems lost. But this is just the beginning because what I'm about to tell you goes far beyond a simple abandonment. It's about the battles I fought to reclaim myself and the quiet revenge that reshaped everything. Stay with me as we unravel the truth behind the silence. After that day at the office, the silence between me and my family stretched thicker than ever. They sent emails polite, desperate, and at times downright manipulative. My aunt's messages pleaded for a second chance, wrapped in layers of insincere apologies. My cousin tried to sound casual, dropping hints about leaving the family business and wanting to reconnect. My uncle's emails oscillated between half-hearted regrets and veiled requests for help, mentioning their struggling real estate business, hoping I'd take the bait. But I ignored them all. The truth was, their arrival at my doorstep wasn't about family. It was about convenience using my name, my reputation, and my success to patch the holes they'd neglected for years. The harsh reality settled in. They weren't reaching out because they missed me. They were reaching out because they saw an opportunity. Weeks turned into months, and the tone of their messages shifted, from fake warmth to outright resentment. Accusations flew that I was arrogant, bitter, and selfish. They painted me as the villain for daring to walk away, for refusing to be the family's financial safety net or emotional punching bag anymore. It stung not because I cared what they thought, but because it revealed how deeply they misunderstood me. I wasn't angry, I was tired. Tired of being expected to carry the weight of their mistakes. Tired of being the family ghost. And tired of being invisible until someone needed a favor or a dollar. But beneath the fatigue was a growing fire. A determination not just to survive, but to thrive on my own terms. One night, while reviewing emails in my quiet apartment, I stumbled upon a private group chat screenshot sent by a distant cousin. It showed messages mocking me behind my back, calling me bitter, claiming I exaggerated the motel incident, and laughing off the past as if it was just a joke. That's when it hit me. The people I'd once called family weren't just neglectful, they were actively trying to erase my existence, to rewrite history without me in it. But I had the truth. The motel receipt, the text messages, the voicemail evidence of their cruelty. And I wasn't afraid to use it. With the help of a trusted lawyer friend, I drafted a formal notice to the entire family, setting clear, non-negociable boundaries. No more unsolicited financial requests. No more emotional blackmail. No more silence when I needed respect. I made it clear that any attempt to drag me back into their chaos would be met with legal action. The fallout was immediate and brutal. My mom's voicemails turned bitter, filled with guilt-tripping and anger. My aunt accused me of being vindictive. Some cousins took sides. Others quietly cheered me on. The family chat exploded with heated arguments. And suddenly, the invisible me became the center of attention, not for a reunion, but for a reckoning. And yet, in the midst of the chaos, something unexpected happened. A cousine named Danielle, who had sat at the head table during that disastrous vacation, reached out privately. She shared a recording. Her husband had accidentally made a conversation where my mom and aunt laughed about how I wouldn't stand up for myself, how they expected me to eat the bill quietly. Hearing their contempt, their calculated cruelty, it was like a punch to the gut, but it also gave me clarity. They had never truly seen me as family. I was a tool, a convenience, a secret to be kept until it was time to pay up. That night, I forwarded the recording to my lawyer and prepared for what came next. This wasn't just about money or pride anymore, it was about justice and truth. I wasn't going to let them get away with erasing me again. The following weeks became a battle of wills. Legal threats exchanged for silence. Manipulated stories countered with facts. I didn't gloat. Didn't seek revenge for the sake of cruelty. I sought only to reclaim my dignity and make sure they couldn't use my name or my success without my permission. But beneath every legal move, every cold email, was the quiet satisfaction of knowing that for once, I wasn't the invisible one. I was the force they never saw coming. And as I sat alone one evening, sipping a glass of wine in my apartment, I finally felt something I hadn't allowed myself to feel for years. Peace. Peace not because the battle was over, but because I had taken back control of my story. But the fight wasn't done yet. The real test was just around the corner. The weeks that followed were a quiet storm. I kept my head down, focusing on work. But the family's attempts to claw back control didn't stop. Emails flooded in from distant relatives, neighbors, even acquaintances trying to mediate or, more likely, spy. Their messages shifted from sorrowful to angry, from pleading to accusatory. They painted me as cold-hearted, as someone who had turned her back on her own blood. But beneath their words, I sensed fear, the fear of losing their safety net. One afternoon, a package arrived at my door. Inside was a worn photo album, left anonymously. Pictures from childhood birthdays, vacations, and holidays, moments where smiles hid the fractures beneath. I flipped through the pages slowly, memories flooding back. The laughter, the love, the disappointments. and the way I was always expected to hold it all together. To be the steady one, while the others fell apart. It was a reminder of everything I'd carried alone. But it was also a reminder of why I had to keep my distance. That old family, with all its pretenses and secrets. I was not the home I thought it was. Then came a message that caught me off guard, an email from Danielle, the cousin who had sent the recording. She confessed she'd been torn for years, stuck between loyalty and the truth. She admitted she'd witnessed too much silence, too many lies, and that she wanted to help. For the first time in years, I felt a flicker of hope that not all ties were broken beyond repair. She suggested meeting in person. I hesitated. Trust was a luxury I couldn't afford. But the chance to finally hear an ally's voice was tempting. We met at a quiet cafe downtown, away from the chaos of family and business. Danielle was nervous, but sincere. She shared stories I'd never heard about my parents' struggles, their own regrets, and the weight of secrets kept too long. She revealed how my aunt had pressured her to stay silent, how my uncle's bitterness poisoned the family gatherings, and how my cousin had tried to bridge the gap but felt powerless. Her words painted a picture of a family trapped by its own dysfunction, one that needed truth as much as I did. But beneath her compassion, there was a warning: some wounds ran too deep. And not everyone wanted healing. The meeting was a turning point. I realized that my fight wasn't just against individuals, it was against a legacy of neglect and denial. Back at work, I channeled that resolve into my company. Each project, each deal was a step further away from the past that had tried to define me. Yet, the past wasn't done with me. One evening, as I wrapped up late, my phone buzzed with a notification. An unfamiliar number. Hesitant. I answered. It was my uncle. His voice was strained, almost pleading. He claimed he wanted to make amends, to clear the air. He said he'd lost more than he realized by pushing me away, and that the family was unraveling without me. I listened quietly, letting the silence stretch between his words. Then I asked the only question that mattered: why now? He stumbled, then admitted they were desperate financially and emotionally. Their business was crumbling, their alliances fractured. They needed me. But this time, not just as a source of money or a fallback plan. It was a test. A moment that could either reopen old wounds or close the door forever. I told him I needed time to think. That night, I sat alone, replaying every memory, every slight, every betrayal. The faces of those who had abandoned me flickered in my mind, their smiles, their dismissals, the laughter at my expense. But also the woman I had become, the strength forged in solitude, the success born from resilience. Could I forgive? Could I trust again? Or was this just another chapter in a story of disappointment? The answer was not simple. But one thing was clear: whatever I chose next, it would be on my terms. And that meant no more running. Days turned into weeks as I wrestled with the choice before me. My uncle's call echoed in my mind, a lifeline stretched from a family I had long since cut loose. Yet, something inside me stirred, not anger, not bitterness, but a cautious hope. Could this be the moment for true closure? Or was it another trap disguised as reconciliation? I started digging deeper, quietly watching from a distance. The cracks in their facade were undeniable. The family business was struggling more than they let on. Their arguments had grown louder, their alliances thinner. I saw desperation in their public posts and heard it in whispered rumors among mutual contacts. But I was no longer the scared 18-year-old left alone at a motel. I had learned to see beneath the surface, to read between the lines. So I devised a plan not of vengeance, but of control. I reached out to my legal team, briefing them on possible scenarios. I began quietly strengthening my company's boundaries and protections. Then, I accepted a meeting request from my uncle, this time on my terms. We met at a neutral location, a small conference room in a co-working space downtown. The air was thick with unspoken histories. He arrived with the same confident stride he'd always worn, but his eyes betrayed a man weathered by regret. He spoke carefully, laying out their struggles and extending a tentative olive branch. No more accusations. No more blaming, just a desire to rebuild, to heal. I listened, watching for cracks, for the old manipulations masked in new words. But beneath it all, there was sincerity. When it was my turn, I didn't unleash the fury I'd bottled up for years. Instead, I set clear terms, boundaries that demanded respect, accountability, and transparency. No more silent debt. No more hidden agendas. He hesitated, then nodded. It was a start. But trust, I reminded myself, was a slow burn, not a sudden flame. As days passed, small signs of change appeared. My uncle began making calls, reaching out to family members with genuine apologies. Danielle became a crucial ally, helping to mediate tense conversations and easing old wounds. Yet, the true test came when my cousin reached out to me directly. His message was different, no defensiveness, no excuses, just honesty. He admitted to feeling lost and powerless amidst the family chaos and expressed a desire to rebuild a relationship based on truth. That message touched something deep inside me, a reminder that family, complicated as it was, could sometimes mean more than the pain it caused. But just as I allowed myself to imagine healing, a sudden twist shattered the fragile peace. An anonymous leak surfaced: online private messages, old conversations, and photos that painted me in a damaging light. The family's narrative shifted again, now painting me as the villain who refused forgiveness, who weaponized her success to humiliate them. The backlash was swift. Clients called with questions. Partners hesitated. Social media buzzed with whispers and rumors. The battle was no longer just personal, it was professional. I felt the familiar sting of betrayal, the suffocating weight of judgment. But this time, I wasn't alone. My legal team moved quickly, issuing takedown requests and clarifications. Danielle and a few trusted friends rallied around me, offering support and strength. I responded not with rage but with calm resolve. I shared my truth publicly, without bitterness, owning my story and exposing the truth behind the smear. It was a turning point not just for me but for the entire narrative. As the dust settled, I found myself standing taller. Not because I'd crushed my enemies, but because I'd refused to let their darkness consume me. The family I once thought I'd lost was still tangled in its own web of secrets and lies. But I had stepped into the light on my own terms. And for the first time, the future felt truly mine to shape. The aftermath of the leak hit harder than I expected. The world suddenly seemed full of eyes and whispers, each glance carrying silent judgments. I felt exposed not just as a business owner, but as a woman who had fought tooth and nail for respect and recognition. Yet, amid the chaos, a strange clarity settled in. This was my moment to reclaim my narrative. Not by tearing others down, but by standing firmly in my truth. I began sharing my story not as a victim, but as a survivor, who had chosen to rise. I spoke honestly about the abandonment, the betrayal, and the years of silent struggle. But I also spoke about resilience, about setting boundaries, and about the power of self-worth. The response was overwhelming. Messages poured in from strangers who saw themselves in my journey, from friends who had witnessed my strength, and even from some family members reaching out with tentative apologies. It wasn't forgiveness yet. That was a path for later, if at all. But it was a beginning. With my team's help, I rebuilt the trust shaken in my business. I hosted open forums, created transparency where there was once secrecy, and doubled down on the values that had gotten me this far. Slowly, clients returned, partners recommitted, and the whispers faded into respectful conversations. And then came the call I hadn't expected. It was from my cousin, the one who had reached out before the leak. He asked if we could meet. Not to talk business, but to talk family. To try to understand. To heal. Or at least to start. Sitting across from him, I saw a mix of regret and hope in his eyes. He admitted how much they had taken me for granted, how they had underestimated my strength, and how they had failed to see me as more than just a shadow in their lives. For the first time, I didn't have to defend my worth, he acknowledged it freely. We didn't solve decades of pain in one conversation, but we planted a seed. And sometimes, that's enough. As I left that meeting, I felt a weight lift, not because the past was erased, but because I had finally accepted it. I had forgiven myself for the wounds I carried and found peace in knowing that my worth was not defined by others' approval. Looking back, the journey wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming my power and my voice in a world that had tried to silence me. It was about turning pain into strength and isolation into self-respect. I realized that family, like life, is messy and complicated. It doesn't always give us what we deserve, but it can teach us what we're truly made of. And as I stand here today, I am proud not because I conquered others, but because I never gave up on myself. So, if you've ever felt invisible or unappreciated, remember this: your value isn't tied to the roles others assign you. You get to define your own story. And sometimes, walking away is the first step toward coming home. Thank you for being part of this journey with me. If my story resonated, please like, comment, and subscribe. Share your own experiences below. Let's build a community of strength and support together. Until next time, stay strong, stay true, and remember, your story is worth telling. Story 3. I'm Emily, 32 years old. And for as long as I can remember, I was the one who held my family together quietly, without complaint, without thanks. But that Thanksgiving, everything shattered. I flew home to Phoenix, full of hope that maybe, after all the years and distance, things had softened. I even brought a pie, hoping it might crack the ice that had formed between us. When I arrived, my mother opened the door and looked at me like I was a stranger. Then she said the words that felt like a hammer to my chest: "You weren't invited. This is family only." I didn't argue, didn't ask why. I didn't look past her to see who else had made the cut. I turned and walked away, the pie still in my hand, the warmth I'd hoped to bring fading into cold silence. Back in my car, with the engine humming, I stared at the dashboard and realized this was the moment I'd been bracing for, the moment I stopped pretending. That night, I froze the joint bank account I'd been quietly maintaining for years. The utilities, the groceries, the little payments I'd always covered. All stopped. The safety net I'd held for so long vanished. And with it, my illusion of family loyalty. By morning, my phone was a storm of missed calls and voicemails. My mother's voice trembled as she pleaded. My sister's text teetered between anger and desperation. And even distant cousins chimed in, asking what was happening. The family group chat exploded with blame and panic. But not one message said sorry. Not one person asked how I felt. I sat back, watching their world unravel without me. And in that quiet space, I found something I hadn't felt in a long time: freedom. For years, money had been the silent barrier between us. Never spoken aloud, but always felt. I'd covered the bills when things were tight, sent money for groceries and repairs without a word, driven mom to doctor appointments while Danielle posted flawless photos online. I was the invisible backbone. And no one noticed. But when the lawyer read out the will and everything was left to Danielle, my place in their story disappeared. My name wasn't even whispered. That silence was more painful than any argument could have been. I didn't lash out. I didn't beg. I simply stepped away and closed the door behind me. Physically and emotionally. The phone calls came, trying to patch the hole I left. But I was done being the family's fixer. They had written me out. So I rewrote my own story, one where I mattered. Months later, the silence stayed. And it was in that silence I learned to breathe again. I wasn't the unpaid caretaker or the fallback option anymore. I was simply me, choosing peace over obligation. But just when I thought the storm had passed, a letter arrived, a shaky plea for help from the family I'd left behind. No apology, only fear. And in that moment, I knew this story wasn't over yet. Because sometimes, walking away isn't the end, it's the beginning of a reckoning. The days that followed were quieter than I expected. But the silence felt heavy, like the calm before a storm. I kept busy, filling my schedule with work and small joys. But my mind kept drifting back to that letter. It wasn't an apology. Not really. Just a desperate cry from a family unraveling without me. I didn't respond. I couldn't. I'd made my choice. And I had to stand by it. The truth was, this wasn't about money or bills anymore. It was about respect. Or rather, the lack of it. I remembered every late-night drive to the hospital. Every time I patched up a leaky roof. Every time I swallowed my pride to keep the peace. I thought that was love, sacrifice without conditions. But it was one-sided. My sacrifices were invisible, unacknowledged. Danielle posted flawless photos and sweet captions about family. But she was nowhere when things got messy. My parents, too caught up in appearances. I never saw what was really happening. I was the one holding the house together. And yet, the moment they had to choose, they chose her. One afternoon, I found myself scrolling through the family group chat again. Something I'd stopped doing for my own sanity. Messages flew back and forth. But there was no mention of me. Instead, blame bounced between my mother and sister like a hot potato. Their excuses, thin and hollow. Danielle's posts painted me as the villain. The one who abandoned the family during their time of need. It was infuriating, the sheer audacity of their narrative, but I stayed silent, watching from afar. Then came the calls from my brother, short, angry, and full of resentment. He hadn't spoken to me directly in over a year, except when he needed something fixed or money lent. He accused me of burning bridges, of punishing the family unfairly. But he didn't ask why. No one did. I wasn't their family anymore. Just a convenient punching bag when things went wrong. As the days stretched on, I meticulously gathered every bank statement, every payment, every automatic transfer I'd made for years. It was exhausting, reliving every moment of invisible labor. But it was necessary. I compiled the evidence into a clear, unarguable record: over $18,000 quietly given, forgotten by those who took it. This wasn't about revenge, it was about truth. About finally holding a mirror up to a family that had spent years turning their backs on me. One evening, as I sat alone with my spreadsheets and cold coffee, a vague social media post from Danielle popped up, hinting at fake family and money-changing people. It was thinly veiled, a jab that wasn't lost on me. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. The truth was out there, waiting to be acknowledged. Days later, my mother sent a message in the group chat, trying to cast me as the villain for holding them accountable. She spoke about forgiveness and family, but it rang hollow after years of neglect. I didn't reply. I had made peace with my decision, and I wasn't going to back down. I'd hired a lawyer and a financial advisor to protect myself and ensure my resources stayed under my control. No threats, just boundaries. The pressure escalated. 4 days after I froze the accounts, my sister showed up unannounced at my door. I saw the exhaustion on her face, the forced confidence hiding panic. She begged for just a temporary reprieve, a chance to cover the holidays. But I had already closed that chapter permanently. When she realized there was no going back, her mask slipped, panic flickering in her eyes. She left without another word, slamming the door in a way that echoed long after. The group chat fell silent, the storm finally passing. For the first time in years, the holidays were calm. Not because things were fixed, but because I had stopped carrying their weight. I went back to work, to my life, and felt a peace I hadn't known in a long time. My family was crumbling without me, and I was free. But freedom wasn't without cost. As I sat with my quiet victories, I knew this was just the beginning. They had chosen their path, and I had chosen mine. Now, I was ready to write the next chapter on my terms. Weeks passed, and the silence from my family became deafening. The group chat remained dark, calls unanswered, messages unread. The house, once full of life and laughter, was now just a shell, lights flickering erratically, water shutting off and on, repairs left undone. I watched from a distance, through updates from neighbors and occasional texts from distant relatives. The slow unraveling of a world I had once tried so hard to hold together. It wasn't schadenfreude. Not really. It was a quiet reckoning, the natural consequence of neglect and entitlement. One evening, as I sat by my window with a cup of tea, my phone buzzed with a message I hadn't expected: a picture of the house's latest utility bill, months overdue. Final notices plastered across it. The caption was simple: "This is what happens when you take the safety net away." I didn't reply. Instead, I felt a strange mixture of vindication and sorrow. This was their reality now, a reality they had chosen. One I would no longer fix. Despite the turmoil, my life was shifting. Freed from the invisible chains of family obligation, I began to invest in myself. I booked a trip to a place I'd always dreamed of visiting. Not to run away, but to celebrate a hard-earned peace. My business was growing, my friendships deeper, and my sense of self stronger than ever. Each step away from their chaos felt like reclaiming a piece of myself lost in years of unpaid emotional labor. But the story wasn't over. One afternoon, a knock at my door jolted me from a rare moment of calm. Standing there was my mother, frail and weary, her eyes heavy with exhaustion. Behind her, silently watching, was Danielle. Neither spoke as I let them in, the air thick with unspoken words and regrets. They had come not with apologies, but with desperation. The house was failing, the bills piling, and the facade crumbling fast. They needed help. And for the first time, the roles had reversed. I watched my mother struggle to hold herself together, her usual defenses stripped away by the reality of what they had lost. Danielle's eyes darted around nervously. No longer the confident golden child, but a shadow seeking refuge. The weight of years of neglect, silent sacrifices, and broken promises hung between us like a storm waiting to break. For a long moment, I said nothing. I wasn't sure what I was willing to offer, not out of spite, but because I needed to protect what little peace I'd built. They had burned bridges. It was their choice. But beneath my guarded exterior, something stirred a quiet question. Could there still be a way to rebuild? Or was this final chapter meant to close with the door firmly shut? As the evening shadows lengthened, we sat in tense silence, the past and present colliding in every glance and half-spoken word. This was a crossroads not just for them, but for me. Would I step back into the chaos? Or would I finally walk away for good? The air in the room felt thick, heavy with memories and unspoken grievances as my mother and sister sat quietly, glancing at each other but saying nothing. It was clear they expected me to fill the void, to be the rescuer once again. But this time, I was different. I was no longer the invisible safety net. My heart still ached seeing them worn down, but the years of neglect and indifference had hardened my resolve. I wasn't about to lose myself trying to salvage a family that had already let me go. I finally broke the silence, my voice steady but calm. "I'm not here to fix everything," I said, locking eyes with both of them. "You made choices. I made mine." My mother's eyes welled up, but she didn't speak. Danielle shifted uncomfortably, her usual confidence stripped away. I saw, beneath that polished facade, a frightened girl desperate for control she'd never had. I told them what I would offer: limited help, but only on my terms. No more silent sacrifices. No more invisible labor. I laid out clear boundaries. No more financial bailouts. No more emotional blackmail disguised as family drama. If they wanted to rebuild, it had to be on a foundation of honesty and respect, not entitlement and resentment. The room was silent except for the faint hum of the heater, every word hanging in the air like a challenge. Their reactions were telling. My mother's face crumpled into a mixture of regret and guilt, but pride stopped her from apologizing outright. Danielle, meanwhile, tried to bargain, promising things would change, that they could be different if I just gave them one more chance. But I saw, through the desperation, the rehearsed lines, the hollow promises that had fallen flat too many times before. I paused, watching them grapple with the reality that this wasn't the same person they'd once taken for granted. "I'm not the same either," I reminded them. "I'm done being your fallback." For the first time, the distance between us was palpable, no longer just physical, but emotional. A chasm built by years of unbalanced love and unmet expectations. That night, after they left, I sat alone on my porch, The silence, a balm and a reminder. The choice to walk away wasn't easy. But it was necessary. I thought about all the times I had bent over backward, putting their needs before my own, only to be met with indifference or worse, disrespect. This time, I wasn't giving myself away for free. Days turned into weeks, and life began to settle into a new rhythm. The absence of calls and messages that once left me anxious was now a source of peace. I poured myself into my work, into friends who truly cared, and into healing the wounds I'd carried for so long. Each morning I woke up feeling lighter, freer, no longer shackled by guilt or obligation. But the story wasn't over. One unexpected morning, a letter arrived. No return address. Only my name scrawled in shaky handwriting. Inside was a note. Simple and desperate, the house was failing. Utilities shut off. And they needed help just for a little while. Reading those words, I felt a familiar pang. But it wasn't enough to break my resolve. They hadn't asked for help before. Now, in crisis, they reached out, but it was too late for me to step back into the old roles. I folded the letter slowly, placed it in a drawer, and didn't reply. This time, I was done saving a family that never saved me. Instead, I looked forward to the future I was building, one on my terms, grounded in respect and true connection, not obligation. Walking away wasn't an act of cruelty. It was an act of survival and self-love. The months that followed were marked by a calm I hadn't known for years. The absence of their voices, once a source of unease, became a sanctuary. I poured myself into my work, rebuilding the fragments of my life with steady hands and a clear mind. The freedom to live untethered from their expectations was intoxicating. Yet, beneath it all simmered the pain of what was lost, a family fractured by silence and indifference. One quiet evening, as I sipped tea on my balcony, my phone lit up with a message that unsettled me. A simple, hesitant text from my sister. She spoke of struggles, of utilities shut off, of the house falling into disrepair, and a plea for help. I stared at the words, the familiar ache twisting inside me. But I did not respond. The years of invisibility and neglect had carved deep wounds. And this felt less like an apology and more like a desperate reach for a lifeline I had already cut. I closed my phone, the decision firm and unyielding. This time, I would not be the safety net. The peace I'd fought for was worth more than the chaos I'd left behind. And yet, the silence between us was deafening proof that some doors, once closed, rarely reopen. Life moved forward. I found joy in small victories, the first signs of spring, the laughter of friends, the hum of a thriving career. The past, with its betrayals and heartbreak, became a distant shadow, no longer able to control my present. I reclaimed my narrative, no longer defined by their choices but by my courage to walk away. Then came a letter from my mother, penned in a shaky hand, filled with words of recognition and a hesitant pride in what I had become. It was not an apology, but it was something, a crack in the wall they had built around us. I folded it carefully and placed it among my keepsakes. A reminder that healing begins in small, fragile moments. As I readied myself for the next chapter, a message arrived from my brother. A simple note, stripped of pretense, offering a tentative olive branch. I didn't respond immediately. Healing, I understood, wasn't about erasing the past, but learning to live beyond it. The journey was far from over, but I had taken the first steps toward freedom. Freedom from expectation, From pain. From the invisible chains of a family that never truly saw me. I had chosen myself. And, in doing so, I found a peace that no betrayal could steal. The shed I once called my sanctuary. The quiet nights spent building dreams from scratch had become the foundation of a life rebuilt on resilience and self-respect. And as I locked the door behind me one last time, I knew this was just the beginning. Because sometimes, the greatest act of love is letting go, and in that letting go, discovering the strength to rise. The quiet that settled over my life after the last confrontation was something I never expected to crave. It was as if the noise of their demands, the endless guilt trips, and the subtle dismissals had been a weight I didn't realize I was carrying every day. Now, without it, I could breathe. Really breathe for the first time in years. But peace, as I soon learned, didn't mean forgetting. It meant carrying the scars with dignity and learning when to fold and when to fight. One morning, a faint knock at the door stirred me from my thoughts. My heart quickened. A reflex built from years of disappointment. I hesitated before opening it, bracing for another confrontation. An apology. Or worst of all, indifference masquerading as concern. It was neither. Standing there was my cousin, Emily, the quiet one from the other side of the family, who rarely got involved but had always shown a flicker of kindness. I heard things have been tough, she said softly, eyes searching mine for a sign I was open. I'm not here to judge. Just to listen. Her words cracked open, something inside me hope. Maybe. Or the simple relief of not feeling alone. For the first time, I shared pieces of the story I'd buried: the cold exclusion, the financial betrayal, the long nights spent patching holes in a family that never thanked me. Emily didn't offer platitudes. She just nodded, understood, and sat beside me in silence. This small act of solidarity rekindled a fragile thread of connection. It reminded me that family isn't always about blood or shared history, it's about who shows up when the rest walk away. And as Emily's visits became more frequent, I realized I wasn't ready to write off every relationship. Some were worth salvaging, some were still worth fighting for. But fighting didn't mean returning to the chaos I'd escaped. It meant setting boundaries sharper than any blade. Choosing self-respect over resentment. When my sister sent another tentative text asking for help, this time about overdue bills and mounting pressure, I replied honestly I cared. But I wouldn't sacrifice my peace. They had to find their own way, with their own consequences. The days grew warmer, and with spring came new opportunities. I found myself volunteering at a local community center, helping others rebuild their lives. Just as I had. It was a quiet rebellion, a way to turn pain into purpose. Helping others heal reminded me that while family wounds run deep, they don't have to define us. Yet, even with the healing and the new bonds, shadows lingered. The anniversary of my father's passing arrived, a day I dreaded and avoided. Memories crashed like waves: his distant approval, his cold favoritism, the unspoken rules that shaped our lives. I sat alone, journal in hand, and allowed the grief to wash over me. Writing letters I would never send. Words that helped me release the last chains of anger and guilt. That night, a call came from my mother. Her voice was frail, layered with regret I hadn't heard before. No excuses, no demands, just a quiet admission that maybe she'd lost sight of what truly mattered. I listened but kept my guard up. Forgiveness, I realized, wasn't a gift I gave freely anymore. It was earned. carefully and deliberately. With each conversation, each visit, each choice not to respond, I carved out a space where I could thrive. The story that began in exclusion and betrayal had transformed into one of resilience and self-love. I wasn't just surviving, I was living. On my own terms. As the sun set on another day, I stood on my balcony, the city lights twinkling like distant promises. The future was unwritten, all full of uncertainty but also possibility. And for the first time, that uncertainty felt like freedom. Because sometimes, the hardest battles lead to the most profound victories. And sometimes, the family you choose is the one you build from the pieces you refuse to break.